Okay. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Prakash. Here. Kunjabi Hari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jai Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Bhajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari. Jai Mr. Pad Paramahansa Purajikacharya Astotar Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Purajikacharya Astotar Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On his 21st day of July 2021 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We're in chapter 13, Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. Text number 21 on page 552. Karya, Karana, Kartritve, Hetu, Prakritir Uchyate, Purusha, Sukadukkanam, Bhoktritve, Heturuchyate. Karya Karna Kartritve, Hetu Prakritir Uchyate, Purusha Sukadukkanam, Bhoktritve Heturuchyate. Karya Karna Kartritve, Hetu Prakritir Uchyate, Purushak Sukadukkanam, Bhoktritve Heturuchyate. Karya Karna Kartritve, Hetu Prakritir Uchyate, Purushak Sukadukkanam, Bhoktritve Heturuchyate. Karya karana kartritve hetu prakritir uchyate purusak sukadhukanam bhoktritve hetu uchyate. Karya karana kartritve hetu prakritir uchyate purusak sukadhukanam bhoktritve heturuchyate. Karya karana kartritve hetu prakritir uchyate purusak sukadhukanam bhoktritve heturuchyate. Daniel, give it a shot. Karya karana kartritve hetu prakritir uchyate purusak sukadhukanam bhoktritve heturuchyate. Needs a little work. Tyler, go for it. Karya karana kartritve hetu prakritir uchyate purusak sukadhukanam bhoktritve hetur uchyate. Word by words. Karya of effect, karana and cause, kartritve in the matter of creation, hetuhu the instrument, prakritihi material nature, uchyate is said to be. Purushaha, the living entity, sukha, of happiness, dukhanam, and distress, bhoktritve, in enjoyment, hetuhu, the instrument, uchyate, is said to be. Translation. Nature is said to be the cause of material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this world. Purport. The different manifestations of body and senses among the living entities are due to material nature. There are 8,400,000 different species of life, and these varieties are creations of the material nature. They arise from the different sensual pleasures of the living entity, who thus desires to live in this body or that. When he is put into different bodies, he enjoys different kinds of happiness and distress. Now clearly that enjoys means experiences. The word bhoktritve in the Sanskrit says in enjoyment, but it's sukha dukkam. You enjoy the pleasures, but you don't enjoy the distress. So bhoktritve has a broader meaning. It often means to enjoy, but in general it means to experience. So I just keep that in mind. When he's put into different bodies, he experiences different kinds of happiness and distress. His material happiness and distress are due to his body and not to himself as he is. In his original state, there is no doubt of enjoyment. Therefore, that is his real state. Because of the desire to lord it over material nature, he is in the material world. In the spiritual world, there is no such thing. The spiritual world is pure. But in the material world, everyone is struggling hard to acquire different kinds of pleasures for the body. It might be more clear to state that this body is the effect of the senses. The senses are instruments for gratifying desire. Now, the sum total, body and instrument senses, are offered by material nature. And as will be clear in the next verse, the living entity is blessed or damned with circumstances according to his past desire and activity. According to one's desires and activities, material nature places one in various residential quarters, namely bodies. The being himself is the cause of his attaining such residential quarters and his attendant enjoyment or suffering. Once placed in some particular kind of body, he comes under the control of nature because the body, being matter, acts according to the laws of nature. At that time, the living entity has no power to change that law. Suppose an entity is put into the body of a dog. As soon as he is put into the body of a dog, he must act like a dog. He can't act otherwise. And if the living entity is put into the body of a hog, then he is forced to eat stool and act like a hog. Similarly, if the living entity is put into the body of a demigod, he must act according to his body. This is the law of nature. But in all circumstances, the supersoul is with the individual soul. That is explained in the Vedas, Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.1, as follows. Dva suparna sayuja sakayaha. The Supreme Lord is so kind upon the living entity that he is always accompanies the individual soul, and in all circumstances is present as the super soul or the Paramatma. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnanandana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmidatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara, the disciplic succession. So, after all we've learned in this chapter, now we're getting to two essential verses describing or guiding us in how we act in relation to this world. The whole point of the Bhagavad Gita, there's what we call a normative aspect to it. I learned this in Western philosophy. Normative means guidance for how to act in this world for our best interests. That's the whole point. The whole thing culminates in Krishna saying, well, okay, Arjun, you've heard the Bhagavad Gita. Are you going to fight or not? The whole idea is that Arjuna is meant to come to the point of surrender, which of course he does. Kadashe vachanang tava, which means I shall act as you say. Before he wasn't doing that. He was acting according to his own... He was covered by Krishna for the purpose, but according to his own material desires. So, let's analyze this. Karya karana kartvatve. The effect, the cause. Now, karana is a famous word that means cause. Some of you may know that phrase. What is it? Karana, anadada karya karana karanam. The cause of all causes. Ishvarak Padma Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha Anadiradi Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. So Karana Karana means the cause of all the causes. So when you analyze this world, if you look at it kind of dispassionately, you see that everything around us, including our own body and what we're experiencing, is a result of a series of cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. What is medicine? Medicine tries to get down into the intricacies of how the body is working. What causes this? What causes that? What's the effect? This disease, what caused it? If we can get the cause down, and we can manipulate the cause, and we can cure it, or we can prevent it from happening in the first place. So the whole thing is cause and effect, and here we are now as we at the end of that result. And it's obviously extremely complex that's going on. Now what he says here is hetu prakriti ruchate, that prakriti, material energy itself, is the hetu is another word that means the instrument of these causes and effects, cause and effects. And we can see it like in a car, right? A car is you walk down the street, we kind of take it for granted, but there's billions of dollars worth of cars, in a few miles. America's so wealthy, I was walking down and I noticed a Mercedes parked, like I don't know how many $50,000 cars is sitting there, What does it represent? Oh, years of research and how to build it the best way, the most efficient way, so it's comfortable inside, and all these things. There's probably a million different things that go into just a simple car. What to speak of a body, which is another kind of car. The word yantra is there. Yantra means a vehicle. This comes up in the 18th chapter. Ishurak savabhutanam ridesherdanatishyati brahmayan savabhutani yantra rudani mayaya. It's very pertinent to this verse, and the next verse especially. In this whole chapter, somehow this next verse we're going to read tonight sticks out in my mind as the essence of the whole thing. So this verse in the 18th chapter, Ishwarak Sarvabhutanam, the Ishwara, the Lord, He's within every species of life, every organism, say, in every species. So Ridesha, in the region of the heart. We're also in the heart, right? There's two souls. Krishna says at the beginning of the chapter, Chaitra Gyang Chapimam Vidhi. The knower of the body, of the field, that's the individual soul. I'm also the knower in everybody. Two knowers, right? The soul and the super soul. So this verse says, Brahmayan Savabhutani, these living entities, they're wandering. We're wandering up and down in different planets. If we go to heaven, we go down to hell. But we're also wandering us on this planet into higher species and lower species. Prabhupada gave a couple of his favorite examples, the dog and the hogs. So there's literally millions of them. And what's really kind of breathtaking is that we can go down to any one of them. And we may have been through all of them, coming up. This is real evolution. Not that there's an evolution of the forms according to Darwin, but there's an evolution of the consciousness of every living entity as it passes from one species to another, till finally we come to the human species, the human form, which is a junction. Only in the human form can you act in such a way according to your intelligence, so you're not just moving by instinct. What tastes good, let me go for it. Where's the female, let me go for her, or let me go for him, whatever. Danger, let me run. Fight or flight. Every species has its defense mechanism. There was this little bug. It's at summertime, and they come in from the garden, So there's all kinds. This one was a little worm-like thing just crawling along. I said, oh boy, he's doomed. He's going to get crushed by one of the baboos. Now, because I don't walk around so much, I said, well, in one sense, that's auspicious, right? I'm going to get killed that way by a devotee's lotus foot, so okay. But still, you want to try to save. So I said, how can I save this little worm-like creature that's just, crawling along the road? So I got down there, with my little tissue, and I tried to get him up, and naturally, immediately he gets panicky. It's like the apocalypse is coming. This huge creature I can't even, and he's going to kill me. So he was trying to run, but of course he couldn't get away. But then I tried to pick him up, and then it seemed like I injured him. He stopped. Oh no! I was trying to help him, and now I've injured. So let me let well enough alone. So I sat down. I started chanting. I couldn't help looking over. I said, he moved. Oh, thank God he moved a little. But then he stopped. Oh God, he's injured. Then he moved a little more. I said, okay. And then finally I looked there. He wasn't there anymore. He had escaped underneath the table. Where that was safety. But that was like a whole. He could probably write a little novel in worm speak. All about that adventure. So that living entity and that little creature is the same as us. The living entity doesn't change. There's countless, trillions and billions of them. And we're gradually moving up. Now, eventually, maybe yesterday, that poor worm died. But, he didn't die. My little poem, Everybody dies, nobody dies. Wake up and open your eyes. You're not dead, buddy. You're a pure spirit soul, chant the holy name and attain life's goal. But that first two lines is half of Prabhupada's preaching, Listen, you're going to die, Take it seriously. It's right in the Bhagavad Gita. Janma mrityu jara vyadi dukkha doshana darshanam. Part of the elements of knowledge is to take seriously and see the evils of birth, old age, disease, and death, But the whole, good part of the second chapter is saying, there's no death. You'll never die. Najayate mrite vakadachan. So every body dies, but nobody dies. No soul dies, And keeping those two in mind is very important. In other words, death is on a natural situation, an unnatural situation for the soul. But we think that we're dying because we identify with every specific body. And that's a cataclysmic, we don't know the future, and it's so painful, and all my relationships, what's happening, every time we die. So the whole idea of this is to give us the clue, or give us instruction, how we can act in this same body, in this same world, in such a way that this next death will be our last. End the process of repeated deaths. Which just completely puts the black mark on the whole idea of enjoying in this world. Enjoying the senses mean you're assuring yourself of another birth and death and old age and disease. That's the result of trying to enjoy. As famously said in the 5th chapter, one of my favorite verses, Yehi sangsparjaja boga dukkha yonaya evate. Adyantamanta kontaya nateshu ramate buddha. So we're meant to be intelligent, Buddha, and then to understand this verse. The pleasures that come from the contact of the senses with their sense objects And that includes all of them, whether the eyes, the ears, everyone has a sense object that's pleasing. Those very pleasures bring misery, both in this life and the next thing, And they're temporary. In other words, that's part of the misery. They don't last. So, therefore, the wise do not take their pleasure there. But we're pleasure-seeking beings. We're naturally where do we get the pleasure? That's spoken in the previous verse. Bhaya sparsheshu. This word sparsha means to touch. Bhaya sparsheshu asaktatma. Vindityatmani yat sukham sab brahma yoga yuktatma sukham akshayam ashnate. There's so much of the philosophy in these two verses. Eschewing, meaning rejecting these external pleasures of sense gratification, titillation. Bhayaspa asaktatma, not attached. Vindityatmani yat sukham. The wise devotees, they enjoy the happiness within by contacting the reservoir of pleasure, the supreme Brahman within. That's the whole thing right there. It's not some vague white light it's Krishna. It's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And our relationship with Him and our ability to enjoy pleasure pastimes and relationships, that doesn't diminish. On the spiritual level, that increases. You can't say about, those pleasures produce misery. No. Those pleasures just go on in infinite variety. We're unfamiliar with it, so it sounds like pie in the sky, Pollyanna, but it's not. That's the reality. This is the reflection, the dream, and ultimately the nightmare. So, Purusaksugudukanam, we ourselves are the cause of our happiness and distress. Now we can easily understand that once we simply understand the ABCs of the law of karma. There are certain rules and regulations. If you don't know them, then it's very, very likely you're going to violate them. Like you go to a strange country, you don't know what side of the road to drive on. Well, that's probably, if you're going to drive, that's probably the first thing you got to find out if you're intelligent, right? Rather than just, I'll just take a chance, maybe it's the left side. If you're lucky, you'll just get a ticket and arrested rather than a serious crash. So similarly, this material world comes with a set of instructions. It's called the Vedic literature. The Vedas, Brahma, what he was enlightened with in the heart at the beginning of the universe, and what he then passed on to Narada Muni, on down to Vyas, and written about. This is the instructions of how to live in this world most successfully. Now, because there's such a variety of people in different states of consciousness, there are also instructions on how to live materially without extreme distress. This whole idea, we've heard of the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas. Who can say? You haven't heard, I know. But Glenn, you must have heard by now. What is it? Karma Kanda. Yeah, it's instructions, elaborate sacrifices, for getting better birth in this world or even going to heavenly planets. And it's real. There are higher realms where you live much longer. You don't have all of this nonsense going on this plane. This is a middle planet, so but it's Indraloka, Nandanandana gardens. There's descriptions, and so if you're going to be a materialist, at least be pious, worship the gods, and go to the heavenly planets. But ultimately, in Kali, we don't have time to waste with that. And so Krishna, he said, it's silly. You go up and then you enjoy godly delights. Chine, and what did he say? Tetam bhukva swargalokam. Swargaloka is heaven. Vishalam, you enjoy godly delights, But unfortunately, the next line. Chine, we got to learn this Gita. Chine punye matya lokam vishanti. Chine means exhausted, it's finished. Your punya, it's like putting money in the bank. You perform austerities here, great sacrifices, you pay to have all the Brahmins come. I've never seen it, but you read about it in the literature. There's the Brahmins chanting the mantras. They're trained. The pronunciation, sometimes I wince at our pronunciation, my pronunciation, but luckily Krishna is Bhava Grahi Janardana. He doesn't really care so much how you pronounce, at least at first, But if you're sincere, he's looking for the bhava, how sincere you are in chanting Hare Krishna, whatever. There's a story where Tamal Krishna Maharaj, who pioneered preaching in China, it's an incredible story. he had been running you probably heard of this, many of you, the Radha Damodar temple buses. They would buy these trailways buses, these big buses, touring buses, and I don't know how many at the height they had, at least half a dozen, going in different parts of the country. They would go to different colleges, and Vishnu Jan was on one of them. Vishnudan Swami, the legendary, and he would be playing the harmonium and singing. And you had one fellow who learned how to play the esaraj, which is like wonderful. It's like a violin type instrument. It makes a wonderful exotic sound. So they got good enough to really. So they set up on campus. You can imagine. You go into your next class and say, "What's that?" Before long they had a little crowd. And they would attracted the students. And then Tamal Krishna was a powerful preacher. He would convince some of the students to come in on the bus, much to the chagrin of their parents, who were wondering, they haven't got any letters from the kid who is in school. Anyway, I'm just digressing. So anyway, they started going around, and it was very successful. They were distributing hundreds of books and making a lot of thousands of books, making a lot of devotees. But they also got a little bit aggressive. They would go to temples, and temples they're struggling along, and usually run by a grahasta couple, sincere, and they have a few other grahasta couples and a couple of brahmacharis. So they would focus on the brahmacharis and convince them, "Hey, come on, let's go. You can get on the bus. We have an adventure." And they were stealing all the brahmacharis from the temples. So at one point they approached Prabhupada in Mayapur, and they complained. They'd be trying to run these temples, and we have these sincere brahmacharis, and they were all, like, probably all you guys would have joined on the bus. We wouldn't see you again, if they were still going on. So, so anyway, finally it got to a point where Prabhupada had to say, "Stop that! You can't stop this." So Tamal Maharaj said, "Well, what am I going to do now, man? You might as well send me to China." And that was understood to be, which is like a sentence of death practically, because China, Red China, it was much more strict than it even is today, which is so Prabhupada said, "Yes, good idea." So he spent the next couple of days finding out all the reasons why he shouldn't go to China. Then he presented his argument to Prabhupada, couldn't get out of it. So he surrendered to go into China. Of course, he didn't go and still have a big kirtan outside. He dressed as a tourist or a scholar or whatever it was. He got in an official way. And he felt out, some places where there might be some interest, and he pioneered it, which was incredible. So, in the course of preaching, many, many devotees were made. So, in China, it's kind of a cliche. It's hard to, they have trouble pronouncing the R's. They come out as L's. So one devotee, he come to his Gurudev, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I don't know how I can chant this mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama. What to do? So Tamal Maharaj says, "That's okay, you just keep chanting. Krishna is looking for your heart, Bhava Grahi Janardana," which is literally a verse about mispronunciation. I swear, I always forget the actual Sanskrit. What it says is, the fool addresses Vishnu. In Sanskrit, there are various, it's an inflected language. It means the form of the word changes according to its use in the sentence, whether it's a direct object or an adjective or a verb like that. The same word can change. So, we know one intuitively, even though we may not know what it's called. When we say Namah Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prestaya, this is a vocative form. You're offering obeisances directly to Srila Prabhupada, Nama Vishnu Padaya, who are at the lotus feet of Vishnu, who are very dear to Krishna, Krishna Preshtaya, Bhutale, like that. So when the evocative for Vishnu is not Vishnaya, it's Vishnave. It changes, it's an exception, it happens, So he says, the verse says, the fool will say Vishnaya, and the learned Brahman will say Vishnave. But both of them get the same result, because Bhava Grahi Janardana, Krishna, he is looking for the Bhava, he's looking for the feeling. So the fool may be a sincere devotee, he just doesn't know how to pronounce. And so Krishna will hear and say, there's a nice story. Now this reminds me of a story from the CC, it's very dramatic, where Lord Chaitanya is touring South India, and he comes to the temple, Ranganath, I think, big temple. And maybe it's Rameshwaram. Is it Rameshwaram? Somebody's listening. Yeah, they say. So anyway, he's there in the temple, and he sees one fellow trying to read the Bhagavad Gita. He's got this Bhagavad Gita. He's got palm leaves, whatever, and he's chanting, but he's not chanting very well. Prabhupada imitated. He says Om Om Om. And Prabhupada did some nice imitations, And so some of the other people who'd always see him every day, they were mocking him. What are you reading there, Prabhu? Said, well, he wouldn't answer. So, but Lord Chaitanya came and he was asking him sincerely, what are you doing? So my spiritual master told me I have to chant the Bhagavad Gita every day, the whole thing, 18 chapters. That's a standard thing. But alas, I'm illiterate, so I don't know. So I'm trying, But Lord Chaitanya, but I see that sometimes you're crying. He said, yes. Whenever I pick up the Gita and I try to read, I immediately see the picture. Now, this is also a little editing pastime. Because first you have to understand that it's in the Madhya Lila, where Lord Chaitanya is touring all over. And and the whole CC, especially the Madhya Lila, and at that time, that part of it was done very fast. 17 books in 2 months. You don't know what that means. All the editing and the proofreading and the illustration and the checking. It was incredible that they were able to do it. But because of that, it didn't get as much scrutiny as it otherwise would have. And so what happened was that it wasn't that he was seeing pictures like we see the pictures. The way they had the translation, he said, when I see the picture of Krishna on the chariot teaching Arjuna, then I feel, how crying Krishna is to be, and his friend, and he starts crying. Is he? So, but he wasn't seeing that picture. In his mind, he was seeing the picture. As soon as he picks up the Gita, he gets the whole vision of Krishna on the back. So Lord Chaitanya embraced him. He said, you're the actual reader of the Bhagavad Gita, even though you're mispronouncing every word, because it's the bhava, it's the feeling that counts. So, where was I? How did I get onto that? This process of living in the material world, Krishna it will teach us in the next verse especially that we are responsible for ultimately for our happiness and distress. It is our decisions of what we do. Now, we may be so unfortunate that we never even can learn the laws of nature that we should follow and be born into this society, But by Prabhupada's great effort and the acharyas, we've been given this chance to learn how to act in this world, to really come to the point of experiencing this word sthai bhava. Can anyone tell what that means? You know what bhava means? Ecstasy. Sthai. Sthai means steady. Steady ecstasy. Rather than flickering happiness of sense gratification, to be on that platform, it's a very high platform, just before prema, where you're always in ecstasy. Varieties of ecstasy. Can you imagine it? Regardless of your externals. You may be walking around in a loincloth or whatever, or the externals may be very cold or hot. That doesn't matter. You're transcended all the dualities of the material world, and you're basically always in ecstasy because you're seeing Krishna everywhere. And you're trying to serve him by glorifying him and chanting his name and remembering and all these things. So this is a revolutionary concept. We have the source of unlimited happiness within us. That's what the reservoir of pleasure is. Most of you have seen that little pamphlet. You've come across it. It used to be a big thing, yeah. And that reservoir of pleasure, we unlock it by the chanting of the holy name, purely. Because that's directly Krishna. Now we're so covered over that at first we can't feel much. We feel something, but if we purify our chanting and we become more and more clear, then chanting the holy name, will bring tears to our eyes. We'll experience so much. And when can you not chant? Even if you're sleeping, you can chant in your mind. You can always chant. You can chant in your mind. You should chant a little loudly, mostly, but there's no law against not chanting in your mind. I'll tell you a story. I used to chant in my mind all the time. Before I was part of the temple, because I came kind of from left field with this chant, I got the mantra, and we had to have it was a yoga group called Integral Yoga. I don't know if they're popular now. But Integral means they had a little of everything. So they had, of course, a lot of hatha and pranayama, and then we would sing a few mantras. We sing this, and that, and Hare Krishna was part of it. That was one of them. And then we meditate, maybe 15 minutes. So what to meditate on? You had to pick a mantra. So what would I do? I naturally picked Om. I mean, everyone knew Om. So I was trying to meditate on Om, 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 Om. It was very difficult. Then, by Krishna's arrangement and good fortune, it was the 25th anniversary of the gurus of this movement. His guru was in South Africa, where there's a lot of Indians, and he had established some ashram there, and supposedly they had been chanting Hare Krishna for 25 years without stoppage. Akhanda Kirtan. Now, probably at night, after 10 o'clock, it was a recording that was going on. But anyway, this is 25 years, and they wrote essays by, supposedly, I didn't know any of the names, but the glories of the Hare Krishna mantra. So I bought this pamphlet and said, oh, this is my mantra, obviously, the Hare Krishna. And that's where I first started picking it up. Now, it wasn't long before I learned about the Hare Krishna temple, and obviously got there, and But part of my sadhana, I was chanting a round or two, and then I would go internal. I would chant, in my mind, according to the breath and all this stuff. And then when I went to my job in the hospital, I tried to keep chanting in my mind, and I would try to cure the patients with the mantra. I didn't know what I was doing. Maybe it had some good effect, but then came the point. My father had a stroke. He was only 62. And my mother was devastated. The doctors were very pessimistic, They were surviving. So I go to the hospital one day. This was a closer hospital to where I lived. My mother wasn't there. My brother wasn't there. And he was just lying alone. And so I said, well, let me try it. So I put my hand on his head, and he had a stroke. And silently, maybe 10, 15 minutes max, I was chanting very loudly inside my mind, trying to, project healing power. What is this? So, he recovered. I mean, he didn't recover completely. He still had a limp. He had to have a cane, because he had a stroke. But he could talk, And it was 62. He lived to be 80. He had a whole other career. He met the governor of New York State because he was involved in politics and he was good with people, He was trying to get more money for the seniors of the, something. And whenever he saw me, he said, when are you coming out of that thing? I never told him about that incident. So I'm not saying that's something we should try to become healers. We are healers in a sense. But the mantra has all kinds of powers, and the main thing it does is it puts us directly in touch with Krishna, and it's the dharma of the age, the Yuga Dharma. You must have heard that phrase. Each age has its own most prominent dharma, or process of elevation. In the Satya Yuga, the age of truth, the golden age, people lived for 100,000 years. The process was meditation. That's when Valmiki lived. He famously meditated for 60,000 years, chanting Ram Nam, and eventually he became Valmiki. He was a criminal, and so he wouldn't chant Ram. Well, you chant death. The word death, Mara, Mara, Mara. And so once you start chanting Mara, Mara, it doesn't matter, you're chanting Ram, 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 Ram. And so even though he was chanting death, he was chanting the sound, Rama, 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 and he became purified, and he eventually wrote the Ramayana. So, but that's the age meditation. Then you get to Treta Yuga, the next Yuga. People live for 10,000 years. And it's a little more, the mode of goodness is not so pure, the mode of passion is impinging. So they have these elaborate sacrifices. We read sometimes in the Bhagavatam, because there's a lot of stuff goes on in that age also. And the horse sacrifices, and they have, thousands of Brahmas chanting, big sacrifice. We can't do that now. We can hardly chant Hare Krishna, but, and hiring all those Brahmins and getting hundreds of barrels of ghee, forget it. You know how much, a pound of ghee costs? Like $30 or something there. No way. So then, in the next stage, this is the Dwapara Yuga, people live for 1,000 years maximum. And even those elaborate sacrifices were too much, so they had elaborate deity worship. Deity worship, some of the big temples in South India from that age, because only 5,000 years ago the Kali Yuga started. And the real jewels and diamonds and silks and very elaborate deity worship. The Kali Yuga, even that is too much for us. We can do nice deity worship, but the jewels generally are not real diamonds and rubies, But it's important to have that part. But in this age, and we can all chant together, this one we need to learn. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama eva kevalam, kalo nasteva, nasteva, nasteva gataranyata. Now there's only about 3 or 4 words in that verse. It repeats so much. A very important verse. I put it into a little poem. If you want to achieve the supreme goal of life in this age when dissension and chaos abound, there is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way that can ever be found but to chant Krishna's name, but to chant Krishna's name, but to chant Krishna's name with a stout-hearted vow, and to pray, O Lord Krishna, O friend of the poor, let my head ever under your lotus feet bow. So that last part...
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Hi, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know that I know that you're not done with the purport, but Vijay Krishna Prabhu is here and he's burning to ask a question. So if you
oh my God.
That would be very much appreciated.
All right.
Thank you.
Let me just get, it's not yet 8 o'clock here, and I'll just finish explaining this verse and then we'll get this Krishna. Vijay? He's burnt.
Hare Krishna Dravida Prabhu.
Haribol.
Haribol, my obeisances.
Thank you. Can you just hold up for 1 minute? Then I can take your question, okay?
Of course, Prabhu. Take your time.
Okay.
Hare Krishna.
So, and to pray, O Lord Krishna, O friend of the poor, let my head ever unto your lotus feet bow. Now this is inspired by the 3rd verse of the Shikshastaka. How to chant Krishna's name successfully. The very important verse. Trinadapi sunichena taror api sahishnuna amanina manadena kirtaniyak sadahari. More humble than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree. To think all praise belongs to others, none belongs to me. Such qualities attract the Lord to bless one with the power to chant His name incessantly until the final hour. So that's where that comes from. So our chanting we can achieve everything through that, and that'll be described in this next verse. Okay, Vijay, I'm ready.
Yes, Dravida Prabhu. Again, my humble obeisances. Prabhu, the quote from the purport is as follows. Quote, because of the desire to lord it over material nature, he is in the material world. In the spiritual world, there is no such thing. The spiritual world is pure, but in the material world, everyone is struggling hard to acquire different kinds of pleasures for the body. End quote. So, Prabhu, my question is related to the 2 concepts, pure and impure.
Uh-huh.
You know better than me that the living entity, part and parcel of Lord Krishna, is a pleasure seeker.
Uh-huh.
And the difference is that in the material world we are seeking our own pleasure, in forgetfulness of the pleasure of Lord Krishna, and in the spiritual world the opposite happens. We seek for the pleasure and contribute for the pleasure of Lord Krishna. Yeah. So my question is as follows: if basically we are pleasure seekers, it doesn't matter if we are where we are in the material world or in the spiritual world. We are basically pleasure seekers. Why is it that when I am seeking for my pleasure in the material world, I am recognized in the context of this quote as impure? And when I am seeking the pleasure of Lord Krishna in the spiritual world, I am recognized as pure. I do not understand this difference between these 2 concepts when we are basically pleasure seekers.
I got it. Okay, let me see if I can help with that. So, in the spiritual world, in our natural state, right? Say before we fell down to this world, we were in a constitutional position, and Prabhupada, how many times did he give this analogy? The hand. We all have hands. And the hand functions in such a way that it does our will. If I want to do, I don't think twice. I said, okay, let me get this right. Our hand, now move over there and pick up the water. A little faster, a little slower, It just happens. In other words, the whole arrangement of the body is such that the nerve impulses go down, and so the hand is in its constitutional position, and it's happy, if you will. If the hand tries to enjoy separately, the classic, the senses went on strike, and they said, we're doing all the work. We're walking to work, and the hands are working every day, and we do everything. We go and get the paycheck and put it in the bank and everything, and we buy it and get the money and buy the food, and we prepare it, and do all and then the stomach enjoys. And we're just doing all the work. So we want to enjoy directly. We're going on strike. So they stopped working for the body, and naturally they became very weak because they weren't getting any nourishment from inside because they weren't feeding the stomach. So they finally came to the conclusion, this isn't working. We're getting weak, we're going to die. So they took up their natural role again, and they fed the stomach, and they flourished. So we're in our unnatural role. Krishna is the supreme enjoyer by constitution. And he's expanded in unlimited living beings in order to increase his enjoyment. And by loving exchange. That's how he really enjoys. And that's why Mother Yashoda, he hides all of his divinity by Yogamaya. So he can enjoy that sweet maternal ras. His mother, wants to protect him from all the dangers, This is what he drinks in like nectar, And so we have rebelled against that because we're marginal. We have to have that minute independence, otherwise there's no meaning to the word love. Love has to be freely given. It's not at the point of a revolver, Prabhupada said. That's not love. And so when that enjoying propensity is directed toward giving Krishna enjoyment, then we're plugged in properly, and we enjoy this loving exchange. Krishna gives us back so much appreciation. The gopis, when they see Krishna smile, that's the end of their life. That's the ultimate goal of their life. Krishna is smiling at them. It's the whole thing is explained. The science is explained in the 4th chapter of Adi Lila. The difference between kama and prema, lust and love. They're both based on pleasure, right? But the kama is the pleasure of trying to satisfy our own senses, which are ultimately limited. And I quoted that verse before in the class, which I hope you heard. Yehi sangsparjita boga dukkha one evate. That sense pleasures that we enjoy here, which is the holy grail in material life, are the very sources of our misery. Not only do we have experience, you eat too many globulins or whatever, and you get sick, or you eat some abominable food stuff, you're out of control. And why not? Let's get drunk. Let's have a little, and it just produces misery. It destroys the body, it destroys the brain. It's horrible. A little pleasure from that produces a whole bunch of pain. What to speak of reincarnation, another birth, death, old age, and disease, all for a little bit of sense pleasure. You see, it's a very bad investment. Whereas in Krishna consciousness, a little effort of chanting Hare Krishna, a little fruit, flower, water, offered to Krishna. In other words, it's not very difficult. The whole thing is a change in attitude. And you purify. Now you asked about this thing about purification. That's part of the quote here. That I read here, because of the desire, this is the quote, because of the desire to lord it over the material nature, he is in the material world. In the spiritual world, there is no such thing, meaning there is no desire to lord it over. Your desire is to please Krishna, just like a mother's desire is to please her little baby. Make sure he or she is warm and well fed, and if that baby smiles with that toothless smile, the mother's day is completely made. Have you ever seen a little baby smile like that? You can imagine. What's it in for the mother? There's no sense gratification. It's all simply that reciprocation of love, you see. So that's what Krishna is interested in. And if we provide Krishna with pleasure, just by chanting his name, you don't have to bring any big sacrifice, just chant my name, and dance a little bit. Like we had this incredible kirtan the other morning, with David Vrata. It's like there's no volume. It's not just the volume; it's the energy switch. It's either on or it's 100%. which is good. We need that. So Krishna is pleased with that, and you could feel you're jumping up and down. I saw people jumping up and down who I'd never seen jump up and down before. I was trying to jump internally. I know if I jump, you'll see me in a wheelchair. I used to do that. Did I tell you? I don't want to, all my pastimes and this kind. But we just had the appearance and disappearance. I'm sorry, Vijay, have I answered? The thing is, it's unnatural.
Yes, Dravida Prabhu, again, wonderful answer to my question. Thank you very much, Hare Krishna, wonderful.
Horrible. But the dancing is so important. I'm just reading. I highly recommend this. This is Ratha Yatra season, right? I just completed the Ratha Yatra in Puri, I think, without the crowds, just like the Olympics, But we read about Lord Chaitanya's dancing at Ratha Yatra. There's a whole chapter. And it's amazing. The dancing was so incredible that everyone would stop. And just by seeing the dancing, they would attain pure love of God. So it's the chanting and the dancing. It's a full immersion. The whole body is involved. So Krishna is very pleased at that. He's standing on the altar there. And I don't know if you may have noticed, even when you first start, if you're a little more surrendered, you did a little sincere service, you're chanting a little better, the details will look a little different. The smile is a little broader. There's something. Because you've changed, so you can perceive Krishna more accurately. So he's very much reciprocating. He says, as they surrender to me, I reward them accordingly. So that is real pleasure for the soul. Let's just step back a minute and think about the science of it, the philosophy. Krishna is in the Vedanta Sutra. You can't get more official than that. Vedanta Sutra. One of the sutras is about the absolute truth, supreme Brahman, which you know is Krishna personally. Anandamayo Bhyasat. Anandamayo means literally filled with bliss. And what is the Abhyasat? We can tell from his activities, from his lila. They're all blissful. The evidence is there. Krishna is always blissful. Now, we know that we're part and parcel of Krishna. Mamai Bangso Jiva Loka Jiva Buddha Sanatana. The living entities in this material world are eternally my anksha, my parts and parcels. Meaning that we have Krishna's qualities in a minute degree. It's important that we can never become Krishna, but we can regain our Krishna-like qualities by becoming more and more purified, without all of this material covering. And so, therefore, we have his qualities of Anandamaya Abhyasat, as well. That's why we're always trying to search for it here in the material world. It's a big mistake. We can't find Ananda in this world. We can find flickering sense pleasure, but that just entangles us more and more. It plants a desire seed in the heart or in the mind, which then makes you come back again in the next life to try to fulfill it. Meanwhile, you go through old age and death, and then birth. That's also painful. We forget that. Just so you can come to the point again, trying for sense gratification. You see how tragic the whole thing is. That's why the great acharyas and the great devotees, Prahlad Maharaj, all the other great preachers in the Bhagavatam, they have empathy. This is part of what it means to be a pure devotee. Is to be very, what is that phrase? Here's one you can memorize. All right, we're going to all learn this tonight. Para dukkha dukhi. Some of you may know it already. It's very easy to understand. Para means others. Dukkha, misery. Dukhi makes you unhappy. You're unhappy to see others unhappy. The sadists and the misanthropes and the sociopaths, they're para dukkha sukhi. They're happy to see others' misery. There's a German word. You know German? Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude. Have you ever heard that? Not quite as graphic as that. But Schadenfreude literally means happy at others' misery. And that, came out in the war with the Nazis and all that. And you don't even want to think about it. Just the opposite. So, but the devotees are completely empathetic. And that's we're getting late. Prahlad Maharaj, he has this key verse. I'll end on this because this is so. Prabhupada practically took this verse and the next verse, which I won't get to tonight, as his motto for living. All of the preachers. Naivod Vijay Paradaratte Ravaitaranistvad Vijayana Mahamata among the Chitta. That's the first half of the verse. He's speaking directly to Nrsingadev, and he says, my dear Lord, Naud Vijay, I have no suffering, I have no pain at all. Because I'm with you, and you're on the other side of the river Vaitarani, between the material and the spiritual world. You're with the spiritual world, in the spirit, I'm with you all the time. And any time, I can chant your glories and dive into an ocean of nectar. Even in the middle of a pot where my demonic father is trying to boil me in oil, I'm thinking of you, I'm completely absorbed, I don't feel a thing, I'm still in bliss. That's the reality of Prahlad. But then he says something very interesting. Shoche, but I'm lamenting. What are you lamenting for? Who knows the rest of the verse? You don't have to know the Sanskrit. What does it mean? You got to know this verse, even if you just know it. Shocheta do vimukacheta indriyata maya sakaya badamudvato vibudhan. But I am lamenting for these fools and rascals who are trying to enjoy maya sukhaya, flickering material happiness, and bearing the great burden of a material body, life after life. You know, vimukha cetasa, they've turned their face away from you. This is the whole problem. Turn their back on Krishna. That's why I do the zigzag when we go back. I explained to Dimitri. You know, so you never have your back to Krishna. We know it's in the books. Don't sit with your back to Krishna, but why walk with your back to Krishna? It doesn't. You know. So anyway, it helps to remember. That's the disease. We turn our back on Krishna. The whole world is for, you know, but it's just suffering. So Prahlad works as a preacher to try to bring them back to Krishna, and the whole sampradaya follows in his footprints. You know, and the next verse I don't have time for, but it's again about preaching. So that's the answer. And if we serve Krishna for his pleasure, to be in bliss, forget about your bliss. Just think of Krishna's pleasure and how you can serve him in the spiritual master, and then you find yourself happy, jumping for joy. All glory to Srila Prabhupada, Hari Hari Bol.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening, Jessica, Vijay, and others. Marcy, I think you're out there. Hari Bol, Dhanabari.
Hari Bol, you are most welcome. Spectacular classes, my God.
We
What
missed you,
blessing.
Vijay. We missed you.
And I missed you too. That's why I came today.
All right, Monday we'll read the 22, very important verse.
I'll
Okay.
try to be here. Hare Krishna.
I'm late again. Sorry, take the book.